Hello to people with cameras on. Thank you for showing your faces. It's lovely to see you. Hi. Okay. As people are entering and settling in, just start with our welcome notes. Hi, everyone. It's Thursday, June 15, 10 a.m. Pacific time, 1 p.m. Eastern time, and 8 p.m. in Israel. Just before we start, June to August is CSP's 22nd annual fundraising drive, and you can see membership levels and benefits, new CSP member only area. What else? In the site, special CSP member site with exclusive content, videos, interviews, articles, and more. You can join now to the special CSP member site and get your password from Ari. This is the link. I'll just drop the link in the chat here. No, that's not. Yes, that's the link. And also, June to August is CSP's Hat Logo Wear Challenge, where you can wear your CSP logoed item this summer, send in your pictures, and win prizes. So you're more than welcome to take part in that. We're looking forward to seeing your photos. The link is in the chat right now. Our speaker today is Danielle Schwartz. We're going to be discussing her film Mirror Image, which you've all seen prior to right now when we start. This is CSP online program number 448. I'm excited. We're getting close to a round number. You can see a list of our upcoming programs in this month and the following on our website, www.occsp.net, and some upcoming events on Thursday, June 16 at 12:30 p.m. The three-part Jewish adventure to Baltoscandia. It's going to be part 2, going with Evgenia Kempinski to Sweden, the pop music capital of the world. On Sunday, June 19 at 4 p.m., Jewing in the 60s. David Kaufman will be talking about American celebrity and Jewish identity. And on Tuesday, June 21st, it's going to be part 3 of Dancing with Fire, the Hasidic Masters with Donnie Massing. And I'll also say that Wednesday next week is a special program. I'm leading, interviewing Israeli cultural icon Yair Nitzani, and I'm really excited about that. So there's a lot coming up. And I'm happy to introduce our speaker. I'm kind of excited to introduce our speaker, Danielle Schwartz. Danielle is an interdisciplinary researcher, writer, and filmmaker residing in Israel. She is a certified permaculture designer and a leader of local initiatives concerning urban sustainability and community building in Tel Aviv. She studied literature at Tel Aviv University, cultural studies at Hebrew University of Jerusalem, and comparative literature at the University of Chicago, as well as film in the Sam Spiegel Film and Television School in Jerusalem. Her academic research focused on cinematic representation of Palestinian ruins in Israeli cinema and on other aspects of Israeli visual culture. Mirror Image, her first film, won the Van Leer Award for Best Short Documentary Film in Jerusalem Film Festival and is screened internationally. We're here. Hi again, everyone. And Danielle, I'm happy to have you here. Maybe just kind of to start, take us off kind of into this conversation. If you can say how this film came to be. Like it's a, I dare say, a strange kind of film in terms of form. So if you can tell us how it happened. Was this the plan? How was it born?
So first of all, thanks so much for inviting me. I'm really excited to be here, and hello everybody. Thanks for watching the film, and I'm really looking forward to this discussion. The film started actually in a writer's course that I was doing, and we were the assignment was to write a story about an object. And I was really doing it in the last moment and just thinking like, what kind of story can I write about an object? And I remembered that mirror, and how I used to have some interesting and conversations about it with my grandparents. So I wrote a short imaginary dialogue with my grandfather that basically was the kind of discussions we always used to have about it, that when he would just like kind of tell me the story and I would like poke him about it and he would like laugh and be like, yeah, yeah, there's nothing to it. And that was the story.
Danielle, I'm stopping you for just a moment because I'm getting comments that the sound isn't very good. Do you have a way to put your microphone a little louder?
Just a second.
Uh,
Let's see. Is now any better?
I mean, I hear you fine, so I'm assuming this is the best it can be, and maybe raise your voice a little, and we'll
Okay.
go on from here. Okay, thanks. Sorry for stopping you.
Yeah, no, stop me again. I don't want to talk if you're not hearing me well. Um, yeah, so it was a short story, and then I wasn't doing any film at that time, but I just really was thinking that this should be a film. I think there was something about this image of the mirror image, that was like, okay, this is a very cinematic image, and it wasn't enough just to write about it. I really was curious to see this story through the mirror. So I had a dream about making a film about it, and I actually went to film school to learn how to make a film, to make this film. And when I was in film school, they didn't really like the idea of the film, to say the truth. It wasn't like a typical conflict and plot. I was getting a lot of criticism that there is no story. And really there was a feeling that maybe there is no story, because my grandfather always said that he doesn't understand what the whole thing is about and it's not interesting. Um, yeah, and eventually I was shooting a film that wasn't really showing any dialogue between me and my grandparents, because whenever we used to talk about it, it was just be saying like, I really don't understand what's so interesting about it. Yeah, there's no story to it, so I couldn't make a film about something that is not interesting. But when the day came and I was editing the materials that I shot, it was mostly me talking about myself and shooting the house and the scenery. And I was writing a post about it on Facebook because I was so excited that finally it happened, because this process took years, in which I was interviewing my grandfather together with my cousin who is a history PhD, and interviewing both of them, and interviewing my grandfather in front of the mirror and through the mirror, and making all kind of experiments. And eventually we were shooting the film, and I published on Facebook that I'm so excited that I'm finally making this film about the mirror that was plundered in the Nakba. And a few hours later, I got a phone call from my grandfather saying that he read my post on Facebook. I don't know how he doesn't have a Facebook account. Someone from my family like was spying, and told him that I wrote this post. And he said, so we're no longer interested in cooperating with this film. And I was so surprised, because he knew I was making the film, of course, for a long time. So I told him, but why? And he said, I told him, you knew everything about it, so we've been doing this for years. And he said, yeah, I've been talking to you for years about the mirror, but I never said it was plundered. I never said it was plundered in the Nakba. I never said anything about the Nakba. And I was like, but of course you did. You told me that it happened in 48. And only then I realized that we're talking about the same thing the whole time. And I thought we were talking about the same thing, and I didn't even realize where the conflict lies. That really the conflict lies in the wording, because we don't have any disagreement about the facts. But still, the way that I put it has such a different meaning that really made it impossible for him to tolerate. So at that moment, I was like, okay, so this is what the film is about. Do you mind that we have this conversation on record? And of course he refused, and it took me a few months to convince them. And eventually that's what we did. I tried to write the most natural, simplest version of the story. I could, that will bring the least objection possible. And I thought, okay, so this is the opportunity for me to collect the objections and kind of like record them, because I realized that this is what I was fascinated about these differences in language that we have between us and how they reflect differences in ideology and different in our position and our world perspective.
Danielle, I kind of in brackets, because I think everyone on this call probably has a thought about 1948. Maybe it was about the Independence War or Day of Independence. Can you say a few words about what the Nakba is and how this word is related to specifically in Jewish Israeli society?
So basically, Nakba, I think the literal meaning of the word in Arabic is a disaster, a big disaster, and this is a word that is used in Palestinian discourse to call the events of 1948 and since. I think in many circles, mostly it's considered a process that is still happening. Because in a sense the Nakba never ended or doesn't end until the return. Basically, it's the story about hundreds of people that lost their houses. Some of them, there is a lot of arguments if they were chased away, if they left their houses, but it doesn't really matter. What matters is that they were not allowed to come back. So this is the name of that story, and it's much bigger than just a matter of houses. It's a matter of expulsion of a culture, of knowledge that was local knowledge about, libraries and books and art and theater and music and cooking and common popular knowledge about medicine making and weaving baskets from local materials. And it's an entire culture, an entire local culture that was lost, or mostly lost, as a part of the establishment of the State of Israel.
So then eventually so this being such a loaded word, maybe if you can say why your grandparents refused to be associated with that word, and how did they eventually agree to creating this film?
Yeah, so why they refuse to be associated is, that's the more obvious part. Why they agree is kind of a miracle. I still don't believe that they agree.
One moment, it's obvious to you.
Yeah, no, I will explain. I'm just saying that, like, you asked these two questions together, so it's just important for me to say that, yeah, so in Israel, Nakba is considered a very threatening narrative, because it really threatens the entire narrative of heroism, of the establishment of the state. So it's kind of really the mirror image of the narrative that I grew up on as a Zionist in a Zionist country, that this narrative basically says we are moral, we are good, we did the right thing, we are good people, and we deserve what we have. And I think the notion of Nakba, especially because it's been used by Palestinians to justify their political claims, is perceived as a threat to that narrative, because it's perceived, and I think this is arguable, this is why I emphasize the word perceived, but it's perceived as contradicting the narrative, the justification of the State of Israel. Because if we go back to the moment of the establishment of the state and we say, oh, the Israeli state was not a miracle, and it's not a happy event, but it's actually a sad event, it's a disaster. So this really pulls the carpet under everything we have, the entire story. We are left with, like, it becomes like an ancient sin that threatens the justification for the entire Zionist project. So it's a very dangerous,
A loaded word.
yeah, yeah.
Just to mention again, volume, I'll be trying to talk more softly to balance out our volumes. And if you can raise your voice and talk a
Okay,
little
sorry,
closer,
I
we're going to
will.
try and balance it out. So we're coming to the question of, so why did your parents agree, your grandparents agree in the end to do the film when it's such a, loaded word to be associated with?
I want to try to ask you just a second if maybe now my sound is better. How is this? Does it make any difference?
No, to me, it sounds the same. I'm hearing you fine. I think there's just a very large difference in our sounds, so I'm doing my best. I apologize for those of you who are having to shift between sound volumes. I lowered mine, and I hope it's going to be okay. So we'll go on.
So, how did they agree? Why did they agree? They had all the reasons not to agree. I think they basically agreed because they love me very much, and especially my grandmother, who was an artist, and she started doing art in a very late age. She already was a mother when she was 20, and by the time she was 45, 50, she had three grown-up children, and she was feeling very creatively frustrated, and that's when she started doing ceramic art, and she became a ceramic artist. And as a child, I used to learn ceramic at her studio, and she was very, very serious about her art. She did many exhibitions and she taught, and it was really in her, like, it was really, art was very, very important to her. She used to go to concerts, she used to go to the museum. There was a point when I was a guide at the Israel Museum. I don't think anything I did ever made her so proud as seeing me as a guide in the Israel Museum. This was for her like an emblem of enlightenment, to be teaching art to students. Because that was the people that she admired most, people that would teach art. And I think that she realized that for me, doing this film is basically what would make me an artist. And like, she's right. That film like actually made me an artist. And so she just couldn't resist herself from giving me this gift, because she knew how meaningful it is. She
Um,
passed away 3 years ago.
oh, wow. Thank
Yeah.
you for sharing that. So can I ask, once they saw the film, how did they react? Like, what did they see it? What did they think about it? Were they happy to be part of it?
Yeah, so I was carrying the idea of the film for a long time, and eventually, you need a deadline to kind of make things manifest. At least for me, it works this way. And I eventually found the deadline in the image of the Zochrot, which Nakba Film Festival. So Zochot is an Israeli NGO that works on commemorating and teaching Israelis and others, bringing forward the discourse about the narrative of the Nakba, the story of the Nakba, like the shadow side of Zionist history, because many Israelis don't know anything about it. And the thing is, it's not only like identifying with it, it's just realizing what it means, because even when you're in a conflict with other people, it's really meaningful to understand their narrative and to understand where like their anger and frustration is coming from. I know that for me as a child in the 90s, I couldn't make any sense out of the Intifada. I couldn't understand. I remember asking my mother, but why are they doing this? And she told me that they hate us because they're bad people. So it's more complicated than that, and you don't even have to agree with this story, but just know that this story exists. So Zohot was doing a film festival called 48 millimeter, and this was actually the first event of this festival. And they invited artists to send people to send suggestions for short films. And until that moment, I thought that this is going to be a feature film. I was doing research in all kind of directions. I found people from Zarnuga, it's the village where the mirror was taken from. I interviewed someone that I was sending pictures of the mirror to Gaza, to refugees from Zarnuga, to try to locate someone that remembers the mirror. I was like really shooting in all directions. And then they said, but then there was this opportunity. I sent the proposal, it got accepted, and then I knew I'm making a 10-minute film. And this was supposed to be like just one scene from the film. But you know, this work of distilling the essence of the film, I think really did well for it. So there was a lot of like, how can I put all of these ideas inside 10 minutes? So I had to let go of everything that wasn't necessary, and eventually like stay with very small image, which is my grandparents living in this house with the mirror behind them, and like living their very domestic peaceful life with that object together as the scenery for that happy, stable, healthy, peaceful life. So the first screening was actually in Tel Aviv Cinematheque as a part of the festival, the 48 millimeter festival. And my grandparents came also to the screening. And it was the first time that they saw the film on a big screen. Before that, I showed them on a very small laptop, hoping that they will not pay too much attention. It was not as painful when it was small, but I could imagine that it's going to be very hard for them to watch. And they actually left before someone asked a question. I apologize that my attention is this way, that I cannot read the questions. So
Don't
Shiran.
worry, I'll collect all the questions at the end and you can just keep them.
So they actually left before the event was over, so before the last film was screened. And there was 5 films. My film was in the middle, I think. And then we are all invited to the stage to talk about the films. And I'm looking for my grandparents in the crowd, and they are not there. And I was really stressed and scared about it, because there was, you know, nobody else from my family came. My father, my uncles, my mother came. She's from the other side, so I think she was not. So she's not even Ashkenazi. So it was not so much. Yeah, it was not so close. But the family of my grandparents, no one came. Only they came. And then they left. So I was afraid that this is a really bad sign. It was really hard for me to talk in that event. And yeah, there is a big, it's still not clear to this day, apropos like contradicting narratives. It's still not really clear what happened that evening, because my sister told me that she saw my grandparents outside of the screening hall, and that my grandmother was crying, and it was very hard for her to watch the film. And then I confronted my grandparents about it, and I asked them if that's the case, and they completely said it's not true. And my grandfather said, no one was crying. We were just late for the train, you know. So I don't know. My sister said she was really unhappy with the film. She said that it's very clear. She said, you know, if you turn off the sound and you don't listen to the dialogue, and you just look at the bodies and the faces, you can see that they are suffering. And you are making them suffer. It's your questions that are making them suffer. So it's a bad thing to make people you love suffer. So the film is a bad thing.
So maybe, Danielle, I want to ask you, maybe in light of what you just said, so why was this film so important for you to make, with all the suffering and the pushback from your grandparents? Why?
I just want to say one last thing about that screening, because it's just important for me, because it has to do also with the discussion that we had before, and maybe we'll have later, about the context of seeing the film. Because I want to say that I think what bothered my grandparents about that screening wasn't the film, but it was the context in which the film was presented. And it was presented in the context of Zohrot. There was pro-Palestinian films, mostly films that had Palestinians as protagonists, films with Arab wording, with not only Arab Palestinian narrative, but the language was Arabic, and it was Palestinians who were speaking. And it was like the film was packed in a certain package. And a few months later, when the film was accepted to the Jerusalem Film Festival, I asked my grandmother if she agrees that the film would participate, because I knew that this maybe even will be on the media. I didn't know how she felt, if like her friends from the kibbutz would know that she participated in such a film. And she said, of course, why would I resist that? I don't mind being famous. And I was like, okay. So she didn't mind at all. What bothered them was what the film served. So the film can be portrayed in different contexts, and I think it also really changes the meaning of the film. What was now? So now you're asking, why would I make my grandparents suffer?
Yeah, maybe I wasn't about to ask it that way, but yeah, like, why was this film so important to you enough to create, such a difficult time in your family?
Yeah, so like I said, I wasn't a filmmaker, and I remember when I was working on the film, I was consulting a lot of people, filmmakers that I appreciated. One of them is Neta Alexander. I don't know, maybe you should invite him to your program because he's brilliant. And he told me, maybe you're not a filmmaker, maybe you're just making this film, and maybe you're not going to make any other film. Some people just need to make a certain film. I'm afraid maybe he planted this seed in that event, but I really needed to make that film because it was like just someone needs to make this film, and the only person that can make this film is me. So I have to make this film because who else has these grandparents that look like they came out of a Palmach museum poster, that have in their house a mirror, not a carpet, not a table, not a chair, but a mirror that was taken from a Palestinian house. So, and has such loving relationships and loves their grandparents so much and cares about them so much that they cannot like talk to them and be like, you are these bad people that did something bad and you are wrong. Like, it was clear to me that I need my grandparents, I need their acceptance, I need their love. So I knew that this boundary is going to stop me from making something superficial, because it had to be something that holds to both of these grounds. I have to be honest with my political views and my world perception, but I also have to be respectful and loving towards theirs, because we cannot break this tie. I mean, this bond is not going to break. I knew that from the start. So I just felt that all these conditions are just making this film something that is very, very important to make, because it can it can represent a tension that I think is so fundamental and was so fundamental and influential for me growing up, like the tension behind touching these subjects, that I thought that I never saw it represented on screen before. I mean, I saw representation of like the atrocities that happened to the Palestinians, but I never saw the representation of the tension inside Israeli society about touching that painful story.
Thank you. So I have like two directions I want to go. So before actually, there's a beautiful question. I'm gonna pause with my own, because Gail just asked, I think, a very relevant question. She asked, is it a generational semantics issue? Because in the film, it's very clear you're negotiating like the language a lot. I think And just to give maybe a perspective to our listeners, let's say if I were asked, I would say it's non-generational. The semantics and the difference between independence and Nakba is, but for how would you answer this? Are these negotiations because of the generations, or is it something else?
I think there is a lot of correlation between ideological gaps and like positioning with class positioning, with ethnic positioning, and also generational. So you cannot say that it's just generational, but for sure, I think it correlates with a certain generational difference because different generations grow up in different conditions, and I think that we take for granted some things that for other generations were not, and we have not experienced things that other generations have, and the other way around, like they haven't experienced what we have. So for example, one of the things I think is like more connection to the global like global identity even, you know, with speaking English, being in touch, having friends overseas, having in mind living in a world where people immigrate, or people of a certain class at least. I went, for example, to study in the United States in my as a graduate student. So I think for people from my generation, it's easier to question their national identity because there are other kinds of identities that can replace it and can still support like imagining a future for myself outside of Israel. So it's not, and for them it's not the case. So it's the holiness of the national narrative is yeah, it doesn't last so much, I think, in my generation. But again, it's very much also like a milieu class issue. It's not like everybody in my generation has this perspective, but I think it's more common in my generation.
So I want to maybe move a little into the way this film was received in different communities. You mentioned already context, and I want to start with asking if there's a specific screening other than the first one that kind of stands out in your mind or kind of gave you a new perspective, and if you can tell us about it.
I always love to go to screenings. I'm really glad that I made this film because every time I watch it, I like spend time with my grandparents, and I get to show them off to other people. And every time I feel like, you see, why my grandparents are so sweet, and my grandmother is so beautiful. So I always love the screenings. And I just really love also what it brings out of people because I think there is a certain complexity to the dialogue in the film that just like brings out certain depth also in the conversations that I have after the film. Um, most of the festivals where the film was screened, I wasn't present. I did go to some that were in the United States because I was there in 2015 when the film was going. So one of the festivals I joined was I think it was Ann Arbor Palestinian Film Festival, and they invited me as to be there for I think it was, apart from Jerusalem Film Festival, it was the only festival that I went like as a filmmaker and then like watching films, also Doc NYC. But that was the first Palestinian film festival I ever went to, and I was going as the Israeli filmmaker. And I was worried about it even before the event because I thought it's a very problematic position to be. I wasn't even sure how they're going to treat me. Like, I wasn't sure if everybody is happy about even having an Israeli filmmaker in a Palestinian film festival. And you know, there's a lot of question of like who has the right to tell the story, and why would I be even invited to share, like, do I have the right to tell the story of the Nakba? And maybe I'm even like owning the Nakba, that I'm making my Nakba film or my Israeli Nakba film, and maybe no one wants to hear about it at all. And maybe I'm like, yeah, I was uh, my political consciousness was giving me a hard time, and also just feeling insecure how it's going to feel like. And eventually, yes, there was, I think, a lot of distrust from the crowd, and they were suspicious. And one of the questions they asked me was, why are you, like, who cares about this mirror? You know, like, of all the things that happened in the Nakba, this is what you choose to make your film about. You're making it look like this is the kind of things we're talking about when we're talking about the Nakba. So, and it's not. It's like really marginal. So it doesn't even deserve to have a film about it. If it's your problem. It's not our problem. We don't care about the mirror. And if you're so obsessed about this mirror, maybe you should just throw it away or something. Like, why make a big deal out of it? And this question made me think, and I think it really helped me understand that really this film, I told them it's not a Palestinian film, and this film doesn't, I don't mean to tell the Palestinian story. It's a very Israeli film, and it's a very personal film, and I only tell the story that I can tell. And this is a story about something that exists in my family, and that's the thing that exists. And the mirror is not there as a symbol of the crimes of the Nakba. So it's a symbol for something else, something that is actually more about Israeliness than about Palestinianness. And I think this. And then there was a change also in the discussion, and it turned out to be that some of the people in the crowd that were really excited about the film said that they're so excited to be like a fly on the wall listening to a conversation like this inside an Israeli family. So it became really like Palestinians now were like the guests that were getting an opportunity to view something that they never saw and never knew about.
So before I transition into asking how it's received in Jewish communities, I do want to stop for a moment because you mentioned the mirrors a little more. So I wanted to ask how you see it. Like, why is that as an object so important to you? What does it mirror? And also, where is it now?
Well, mirrors are so fascinating. I don't know, what it's just it's magic. I remember once I was trying to, like, who invented the mirror or when was it invented? But actually, like, mirrors exist in nature because just a pond functions as a mirror. So I was always fascinated about this thing, that you have like a surface that shows other surfaces, and it's just really exciting. And I guess that's why also many thinkers and writers have been obsessed about it, because there's something magical about it. I think that's why it caught my attention. And also I felt that it's very cinematic, because in a sense, like, film itself is one image screened on another image. So it was like the mirror is, in a sense, first of all, an image of film. So yeah, like an object screened, a story screened on a screen. It's a screen, and it's an eye. It's kind of a thing that frames the situation, and it's an object. And like every other object, it has a history. And something I'm really busy with, and it also has to do a lot with my work in sustainability, is how, like, everything that we have around us, all the objects and materials and artifacts, they all have histories, and that we cannot afford ourselves to know these histories because there's just too much information. But there's such a big difference between, like, using a dress that someone made, or knowing who made that, or having objects that have a story, than having objects that I don't know anything about, who made them, where they came from, which is 99.99% of the things around me, including roads and pavements and houses and walls and air conditioners and computers and everything. I don't know who made it. So I'm just really fascinated about this, how things have a history before they came. And this mirror, except from being an eye and being a screen, also had a story. And it has a very important story. So I think it was the combination of these planes that made it so fascinating.
So we spoke a little about the Palestinian Film Festival in Ann Arbor. And I assume the film was screened also in Jewish communities and in Israel and outside of Israel. Can you say a little about how it was received? Maybe if you remember a specific screening.
Yeah, in Israel, it was never screened in a Jewish community because that's kind of like the natural thing, like that's the unmarked option is the Jewish community. It was invited by few like reform congregations in Israel, but I think it never came through. Um, in the US, it was screened in a few Jewish film festivals, which I never went to. I remember once I got an email, really like a short while after the film was shot in the was screened in the San Francisco Jewish Film Festival, and I got an email from a teacher in a school in San Francisco that wrote me that he saw the film in the festival and he really wants to show it to his class of students. Like I think it was like mid school. How do you say, like בית ספר רגיל, not even high school. I don't know
Middle
the word.
school.
Middle school. Yeah, thank you. And I remember for a few days I was just walking and telling this to everybody because I was so excited of the idea that someone far away in the other side of the planet wants to share like this story that I made, and he wants to tell this story to his students, and that he has to write, he wrote me to ask for the permission and for a copy of the film. And I was really happy to see that some of the people, at least one person in that Jewish film festival, thought that the film was a powerful and useful educational tool, which is, I think, one of the reasons why I made this film. And a lot of times it's shown by scholars of Israeli studies in universities in the United States that are teaching like the history of the conflict and Jewish history. So it became a very efficient tool for these kind of scholars that are teaching Israeli studies and Jewish studies to present this issue that inside Israeli culture.
And you spoke a little about context. Did you intend when you created the film that like a lot of the audience will be like let's say you mentioned the Palestinian festival, there are other festivals around like more of the Palestinian story that your film is screened in. Was that your intention, or did you have a different audience in mind?
I think for me it's more, I'm more excited about showing the film to Zionist and Jewish communities. I think it was made for them. It's like a reflexive film. It's meant for us to look at ourselves. So yeah, it's kind of a mirror for us. So I'm more interested about that. Um, because there is something about political use of art that tends to make it superficial, because it many times when it needs to serve a point, it doesn't allow to open the discussion really into the unknown. So of course, when the film is kind of like used, I don't think that it's so much. There is no. It's no like I uncover some kind of hidden secret, like propaganda. No, like it's not like there is a. Sorry, look, I need to look for the words for like.
You can say it in Hebrew and I'll translate it.
כאילו זה לא, זה מין scoop, like, yeah, oh, new facts uncovered about Rivka and Yossi Schwartz have in their house a mirror that was taken from a depopulated Palestinian village. Like, there's not like, there are stories about I don't want to get into it, but even now there are films about Tantura. There is a new research and facts are uncovered. It's not one of those films, so it's not. I don't think that it like serves any argumentation for Palestinian side to be like, oh, but we have this film that proves. What does it prove exactly? It doesn't prove anything. It doesn't even prove that the mirror was taken, whatever that means. It doesn't prove anything. The only thing that it shows that it's very hard for us Israelis to talk about this because it's a painful area in our history and in our story, and it's a hard thing for us to touch and get close to. It's like a wound. So I think this is what the film shows. So that's why I don't see it as anything that is. So I think mostly that's why, like I said, in the Ann Arbor Film Festival, it eventually became more of like an anthropologist view of the Israelis. Now the Palestinian audience is now having a glimpse inside the Israeli family dinner to see what's going on there. It's something that creates closeness. It doesn't, it creates empathy. I think if anything, this creates empathy for those people that if we wouldn't see them and talk to them and hear and see their pain and hear the way they dance around the words, maybe it would be easier for us to just put them, for us or for the Palestinians or whoever like tells the story of the Nakba in a superficial way, like it's a bad thing that bad people did. This makes this narrative impossible because I mean, of course, you can look at the film and just see them as war criminals, but I think the film does a lot to show the human side of them.
And did the film have an effect on how your grandparents or other family members think about the mirror or the history? Did the wording change? Like, did it create this effect that you're saying like it could?
No. The answer is no. And no, I think I never thought that it's going to create any like progress or development inside my family. It was more the possibility of representing that existing dialogue as that will feed further dialogues in the future. I didn't think that the progress is going to be there in the family.
Why not?
Hmm?
Why not? Why did you not even think it would make that change?
My grandparents were 80 when I was making the film.
But what about your uncles, your parents?
Yes.
Did they see the film? Like,
No, they never saw the film. Like my close family never saw the film. It's very it's a very delicate subject. It's a very painful subject. I think they were very appalled at reading about the film online, and the film got covered in like of course, people who wrote about it were many times the people that are more inclined to that side of the political map, and post-Zionist lefties. So, which is considered, yeah, kind of a traitor position in my family and in many hegemonic Israeli arenas. So, and I think the fact that the film actually got embraced by and got like it won the Jerusalem Film Festival, that even made things worse, because if it could be classified as like a marginal, weird failure, maybe it would be easier, but it actually like got a lot of attention and respect, and it was respected. So I think the only way to deal with it was just like we deal with many things, to ignore it. So
So,
just silence, it's
so what I want to do, I'll start asking some of the questions that are coming up in the chat. I also opened the chat so people can kind of write the questions, but you don't need to look at them. I'll look at them for you. So there's a question here. Why was the mirror a central feature in the home? You even said that in the new home, they built a wall for it. So why?
it's just so impressive. And I think my grandparents come from, this is also why I knew to ask questions about this mirror as a child, because it really stood out from everything else they had in their house. Because both of my grandparents were born in Israel, and their parents were immigrants that came in the 20s, and they didn't have much possession. They were like, my grandfather's family lived in a village, my grandmother's family lived in the city, but they were basically pretty poor, living pretty simple lives. It's not like we had any antique furniture passed down the lineage. So it was very obvious that this mirror comes from another place. And it just was so heavy and so impressive. I think they really appreciated it. It's just really, it's like the most expensive and the most antique object they have in the house. And it's very big as well. It's not something you buy in IKEA.
Yeah, no. You mentioned a little about your background. Can you say a little more and speak to like how did your ideology shift? When? Why? I mean, it sounds very different from how you grew up and the way your parents and family kind of look at the world and the situation here.
Yeah. So I grew up in Holon. It's a city in the center of Israel, and I grew up in a Zionist, socialist Zionist youth movement, הנוער העובד והלומד. Actually, like in my 20s, I also was a counselor in Habonim Dror camp in the Philadelphia, Camp Galil, that I was sent to as a part of my shlichut. How do you say it in English?
I think,
Mission.
yeah,
My mission. So many of the years as a teenager and my adolescent year I spent as a missionary, basically, as a Zionist missionary. And I was really, I totally identified with it. Like, apropos my grandparents, that were the people that I admired most in the world. So I knew that they were in the Palmach, and the closest thing that I had was the Nachal, and like the army, and going to and the Zionist socialist youth movement, that they also went to another Zionist socialist youth movement. So it was a big deal for me. I really wanted to be an officer in the army. I think it was just like I was a really good girl and I wanted to be the best, and this was what was considered being good and being excellent. So that's what I wanted to be. That's what I saw, that the people that are appreciated. Like today, I know people that didn't go to the army, people my age that didn't go to the army. When I was 18, the thought about not going to the army It was so crazy. I was sure that if I don't go to the army, my life will be ruined and I will pay the price for it until my last day because no one will hire me for any job, for example. Like I was sure that it's the end of the world. It's like being a criminal not going to the army. So now, today I know people that are very privileged and are living very successful lives. I think maybe the fact that they didn't go to the army actually served them. And yeah, so that was I was living in a world where it was obvious that you are Zionists. I didn't even think about anything else. And I think there was always like all kinds of tensions that were existing but were could not be worded because I didn't have the name for it. It had to do a lot with my objection to authority and my undeveloped, like I have a lot of kind of natural feminist resistance in me, and I think like a lot of objection to patriarchal societies, and I couldn't name it because I didn't know what patriarchy is, but I felt that something is wrong, and I didn't like the power structures, and I felt that there is not enough room for doubt and for criticism, and some things that I think about it today as some kind of collective gaslighting, because there were things that I felt that doesn't make any sense and I couldn't even investigate them. I didn't have the room to bring forward the questions, and for me, I'm a person that needs dialogue to understand. So if I can't talk about something, it means that I can't understand it by myself. So living in a society, in an atmosphere that doesn't allow me to freely speak my thoughts and my doubts and my questions, it really killed me. It creates a lot of frustration for me. And then I went to the university in my 20s. I went to this interdisciplinary program. For 2 years, you just get to go to any class you want in the university. So I had like 2 years of like academic roller coaster. And a lot of the things that I was really much interested in the relation between language and thought. That was basically like my research question that I started school with. And I started with linguistics and philosophy of language. And as time passed, it all seemed so abstract, and I think I was looking for the concrete implementation of that issue of the difference that language makes in reality. And this really correlated with my interest in Zionism. I think one of the changing points was a course that I did about negation of diaspora in Zionism, and we were reading a lot about canonic texts that have to do with the negation of diaspora, and many of those texts were like songs that I used to sing in school or in the youth movement, and it was the first time that I was really looking at them critically and reading critical text about it, like Amnon Raz Krakotkin. If anyone knows about him, he has an amazing article about it. So it really opened my eyes, and I think I understood that there is something I was not told. I understood how the narrative that I grew on is partial, and there are other lines of narrative and other stories that exist, but I don't know about them, and I really wanted to know about them.
Well, Danielle, we have 2 more minutes, and I really want to ask you, yeah, I know. I want to ask you, was Ra'anan Alexandrovich's prophecy true? Is this the only film you made, or did you make other films?
It's funny that you
And are they
asked.
connected?
I never made any other film, but it's funny that you asked this now because I'm just like this weekend trying to use another deadline to make me manifest another film that I'm thinking about for actually a few years now. One of my challenges, as you should say in positive language, is that I'm interested in many fields and I have many aspirations in many fields in parallel. So I kind of like get scattered all over. But so I do a lot of things, but not necessarily in the same field. So now I'm working about my idea for film. Do I have a minute to share about it? Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So it's about my father. Actually, this also started from one of the screenings of this film. Someone asked me, "Where is your father? Why are we not seeing the generation in between? Why is it you and your grandparents? Why is he not there?" And it made me think about him and about his generation. And I think that just like my grandparents are like an emblem or a metaphor for their generation, I can also see my father as a metaphor and an emblem for his generation. And I think that that generation, the generation of 67, is a very fascinating generation, and it's much harder. It's not a surprise that I will do this film later, because I think the dialogue with the grandparents generation is so much easier than the dialogue for me with that the baby boomers generation, that are actually like the head of the state and culture, and they hold a lot of power. And this is also why it's very threatening for me also to deal with that position. So I want to investigate into like the image of my father and other men of his generation.
So Danielle, we need to end. I will ask one maybe last question that I'd love for you to answer. It's a two-part. One is, how long did it take you to film this movie? Like, are we seeing the length of it, or was there an hour of filming and you edited the 10-minute, or a full day? And the other is, where is the mirror now? Because we asked, and that
Right,
answer
right.
went
Sorry,
straight
thanks.
away.
I was not avoiding. The mirror is in the same place. My grandfather is still living in the same house, and the mirror is in the same place. I wonder, yeah, what will become of it one day. And the shooting was, yeah, it's I think it's at least 3 hours. And there is a film director that I really, really admire, Avi Mugrabi, that makes documentary films, and he also reflective. A lot of time you can see the cameras and the making of the film. And he saw the film and he was really excited about it, and he told me, "How many cameras did you use? How did you shoot this conversation?" And I was so proud that Avi Mughrabi thinks that I used a few cameras, because I actually just used one camera, and we just shot that conversation a few times. And that's why in the end of the film you have me reading the correct story, and I'm saying Palestinian village, and my grandmother corrects me. um yeah, anyway, so we went through that text a few times, and every time they had other interventions, and some of the interventions were just actually really funny stuff. And I have a whole sequence of outs, like things that never got in the film, which is just hilarious jokes between them, like, and about parts of the story that they don't like me saying that my grandfather village is small, and he's like, "It's not small." And my grandmother is like, "Yossi, no one knows about it, so of course it's small. No one knows about this village." And I still have the dream of one day making that film, that the comedy.
So Danielle, thank you so, so much for being with us and being so open and present to all these questions. If you do want to, because we'll be sending a follow-up email with a lot of the things mentioned, and if you want to share with us an excerpt of one of those comic moments that didn't go into the film, we'd really be happy to share it with our CSP community. I'd love to see it. You can see now as the comments are coming up how people are responding. So thank you so much. Thank you everyone for being with us and sharing the time. And we're looking forward to seeing you in our other programs. Thank you, Danielle.
Thank you so much for inviting me and for this wonderful presence. I saw you on your video, the ones that had the camera on. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I don't want to close because I want to read the comments on the.
So
Okay, so
I'm not going to close yet. I'm going to give you a few moments. Thank you everyone for being here. And for those of you who don't know CSP, you can check us out at www.occsp.net and join our community. It's an exciting one with amazing people from everywhere and all over the spectrum joining us. So please.
Someone is asking if there is a way to watch the film. So there was a link to the film in the invitation to the event, and I will leave the link open for the next couple of days. So if you want to watch the film again or want to show it to someone that you care about, so I think the next couple of days it will still be open.
Thank you, Danielle. And I do want to say that I think watching this film with a friend or a family member that maybe is sometimes hard to have this conversation with can also be a beautiful way to share a moment regarding Israel that might open different conversations. So yeah. Danielle, thank you. Thanks everyone. Have a good day or good night, depending on where you are. Bye.